We continue today on this fourth Sunday after Epiphany in Mark's Gospel. In the first chapter, this collection is actually two stories, but given as one, two episodes from Mark 1, beginning with verse 21. So they went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed. And they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. "What is this?" the people say. "Who is this?" He speaks and things happen. He speaks with authority and healing occurs. Even unclean spirits do what he says. This is astonishing. It's new. It's not like any teaching or teacher we've heard before. He comes into the synagogue on the Sabbath and he teaches us with power. It's amazing. It's just amazing, they say. What is this? And so we journey with Mark's Gospel again today. If we look back in the Epiphany season so far, Jesus has been revealed in a multitude of ways. He's the King of the Jews, the Son of God, the Lamb of God, the Beloved. He's one who calls disciples. He's a preacher. And today he's a teacher and a healer, even an exorcist. Today he's called Holy One of God, albeit by a demon who is already told to be quiet. In his commentary on Mark, Fred Craddock notes that today's story is the second of 6 episodes by Mark where he displays the essential nature of Jesus' ministry. He teaches and he heals. And what seems to amaze the crowd, anyway, is the power of both of these things. Now, we know that all the synoptic Gospels portray Jesus as a healer and an exorcist. In fact, of the 18 miracles told in Mark, 13 of them have to do with healing, and 4 of those 13 have exorcisms. But I think what we need to keep in mind is that the ancient world knew about exorcists, or at least people who claim to be exorcists, because they really weren't that unusual. What is unusual in Mark's story is that Jesus' healing of the man with unclean spirits occurs in the context of his teaching. An unclean spirit, or an impure spirit, means simply a spirit that is contrary to the sacred. And according to Mark, with great power, Jesus is now the strong Son of God who has entered a world in which the forces of things that are unsacred are crippling and alienating and distorting and destroying life. These things want to sabotage God's creating and God's caring and God's loving work. And now Jesus is here, Mark says. And those things are on the way out. Because with Jesus now there comes the word of power to heal, to give life, to restore. For Mark, Jesus contests with the forces of that would distort and cripple life and oppose the gospel, even occur in the very places and structures of religion. Remember, Jesus is teaching in the synagogue here, in the middle of the religious context of his day. So what is this? It is Mark's strong proclamation that Jesus' teaching and healing have power. Mark Graves, in his commentary on this passage, says that the trouble with a story like this for you and me is that we tend to get hung up on details that aren't central to the meaning of the story. For example, we can bash the synagogue and the scribes if we don't watch out. We do see that Jesus' teaching is radically different, but a comparison with the scribes doesn't need to indict Judaism. Or we can center on our own, what I would call Hollywood images of exorcism. And then we lose sight of the fact that in the New Testament, exorcism episodes are often more about the story that is around them than the details of the exorcism itself. Then, of course, we could always get in a debate about miracles. The miracle stories of Jesus are important, and they are many and significant, particularly more in Matthew's gospel than Mark's. In Mark, the use of the term teacher is actually done in connection with Jesus' miracles and amazing actions. What does the teacher do? In Mark, he stills a storm. He raises a dead girl. He feeds a hungry crowd, or he cures a person with epilepsy. Jesus, the teacher, has authority, and the teacher has power to heal. In his study on early Christian art, John Dominic Crossan noted that the essential Jesus portrayed in art in the first century was known primarily for his feeding people and his healing people. Whether that seems miraculous or not, it was done with authority and with power. So if we don't get too focused on bashing the synagogue or Hollywood images of exorcism or our own way of wanting black and white answers to the questions of miracles, what else is here? What else is in this story which so clearly points to Jesus' identity and his power? Well, look in the middle of the story. Look in the middle of the synagogue, and who enters the room? Someone suffering from a disease. Someone most likely marginalized and even avoided by the religious community. Mark says, just then there was in the synagogue, and a man shows up. A man who is unnamed and who is sick. An unnamed man with an unclean spirit. An unnamed human being struggling with something contrary to the sacred. When we read this story, I ask you this: do we see that? Do we give any thought to the condition of this man? Do we give any thought to his need and his desire for healing? Do we give any thought to understanding what that is like? Evidently, Jesus, the teacher and the healer, did. Unclean spirits abounded then, and they abound now. But in Mark's gospel, it's clear that they aren't to be accepted and they aren't to be overlooked. They desire and they deserve a response. The man is ill. Jesus looks him in the face. The man is in need of help. He needs a cure. I think sometimes in our day we look toward diagnosis and treatments for help. The ancient people looked at cures and fate and the sins of the forebears that caused all kinds of havoc like this man in people's lives. But who did Jesus look at? Jesus looked at the man. Jesus looked at the person. And the ministry of Jesus brought forth the possibility that the miracle comes in the form of the speaking. The healing word causes things to happen. For the man in the synagogue, and probably for the astonished listeners as well, Jesus' healing words were powerful and they were performative. They were then and they are now. You see, Jesus' healing words silenced the blaming, the name-calling, the sheer destructiveness of fear, even fear of God. Jesus' healing words opened the door to new life, to new relationships, to a person having been restored and given a new beginning. Jesus' words brought about transformation right in the middle of the room. And as amazing as it was, I'm sure, it raised the question of whether people in that synagogue would accept a healed man. My friends, we are not Jesus. But I think this story points to the reality for disciples of Jesus that we have been called by him to speak in this world and to speak to this world. And we hope that our words spoken with the power of the one who speaks through us and on whose behalf we speak will cause something to happen, will cause healing to happen, will cause transformation to happen. When you think about it, when you really think about it, what are the healing words we have as a church? What are our individual words of healing that need to be spoken to each other, or to our family, or to our neighbors, or to our community? I mean, who is it that stands among us that doesn't need and long for some kind of healing? And when will we speak with the healing authority and power given to us by the same Jesus who said to the disciples, "You will do far greater things than I do"? There's no doubt about it in Mark. We are agents of Jesus' healing in the world, and our words of healing are important. They are powerful. I believe, for one, that our words can silence blaming and name-calling and the power of fear. I believe our words have the power to heal, to bring new life and new relationships, and offer people a new beginning. I believe our words of healing can bring forth transformation, not just in our lives and the lives of others, but even the life of this world. Writer Gary Clarkson put it this way. He said, "Let's face it, the boundary-breaking, demon-bashing, law-transcending Son of God here has arrived. He arrived in the person of Jesus, and he expects of his followers far more than just standing in the middle of a room with amazement. Jesus wants us to speak." Physician and counselor to persons diagnosed with cancer Rachel Remen, wrote about a patient and client of hers whose name was Max. Max was a 63-year-old man diagnosed with metastatic colon cancer, and he wasn't given very long to live. Max had been married 4 times, and he had made and lost at least 2 fortunes. By his own admission, Max liked to live close to the edge, smoking and drinking heavily, fighting, and loving to drive fast cars. Max was a successful cattle breeder. He grew up on a ranch where his father had been a cowboy, and his mother was the only daughter of the local town banker. Rachel said that Max made it clear pretty quickly that he had never been very close to his father. A father who frankly didn't like the fact that when Max was a small child, he was very sickly. In fact, he was frequently called by his father that little useless runt. Max's mother tried to protect him, and that frustrated his father even more. Sometimes, as he grew up, his father wouldn't even speak to Max or acknowledge him for weeks at a time. When he was 15 years old and able to do it, he ran away from home for good. In his conversations with Rachel, Max admitted that he had developed many finely self-destructive tendencies and habits. He said he liked to push death, and he didn't really mind hard living. He said, "I've just always felt like I was of no account and no good to anyone. From the moment I was born, I was thrown into a situation where I was the thorn in my father's side, and I couldn't do anything to please him, and I didn't make any difference in his life anyway." One day, after many weeks of her therapy with Max and many conversations about his life and now his very serious cancer, Rachel asked Max what he thought had brought him through as many brushes with death and self-destruction as he had faced. He first grinned at her and said, "I reckon I'm just lucky." And then when Rachel looked at him rather skeptically, he began to tear up. They waited several minutes in silence. And then Max, looking down at the floor, said, I've always wanted to live. Something in me just wants to live." Rachel waited a few moments. And then she said to him, "Can you say that to me, looking me in the eyes?" Max's voice was still choked, but he finally raised his eyes to hers and he said, "I want to live." They looked at each other for a few moments, and then Rachel smiled at him and said, "I want you to live too." Rachel said that Max lived 8 more years. And she and Max met together fairly regularly for the first 2 years of that period. And he described in great words and detail how he was assured by the simple words, "I want you to live too." In fact, he often told others that that moment and those words brought healing into his life. Healing. I want you to live too. Brothers and sisters, I don't know what healing words might be from you or to you today. There are as many possibilities as there are those of us in the room. I have my own list. Perhaps the top words on my list are these: I'm sorry. I forgive you. I'm listening. I accept you. I believe in you, and I love you. The healing words have power according to Jesus. So what is this? Who is this? He speaks with authority. This Jesus comes into the synagogue on a Sabbath day, just like today. He comes into the place of security and tradition, to the space that's much like our space, where old teachings are often transmitted and preserved. But Jesus brings new power. Jesus brings new vitality and new teaching, teaching with the power to heal. He still does. And may we have the heart and the will to receive him and respond, because our mission is no less than his, to bring the power of healing to the entire world. Amen.